Hi, and welcome to another Pi Crowdcast. I'm Rick Turoczy, co-founder and general manager of Pi, and I'll be your host. Today, we're here with Anthony Ware. Anthony, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So it looks like people are still filtering in. Make yourselves at home if you haven't been here before. There's chat over there where you're welcome to chat with one another, discuss things we're talking about. You can also chat with me over there, and I'll make sure and drop in some links and that kind of thing as Anthony mentions stuff. The most important part, given that this is a Q&A, is the ask a question button, which is right down there, probably right next to like a highlighted 3 right now. And if you pop into that queue, that gives you the ability not only to add questions that you might have, but also gives you the ability to upvote questions that other people have submitted. And the benefit of that is that'll help us focus the conversation on the things that are most important to people in attendance. And then, of course, if you have to leave early or you have to pop out and come back, this is fully being recorded and will be available almost instantaneously after we're done. And then we'll also upload it to YouTube in the morning so that you'll have access to it there as well. So let's get things rolling. Anthony, why don't you provide us, I know we want to do a disclaimer first, and then also provide some context about where we're going to take this conversation.
Cool. Yeah, I always like to kick these conversations off, whether they're digital or if I'm in person or if I'm a one-on-one, is like, we're going to talk about topics that may be triggering for some folks. And at one point in time, we're definitely triggering in major ways for me, anywhere from depression to suicide or anything like that. Additionally, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a healthcare professional. I'm not a psychiatrist or any of those in any way. And if you do need that, or if something does come up, and you need like a resource, let us know, and we'll make sure to connect you with the right folks. And yeah, so that's like the biggest piece. But otherwise, like today, I think what we're going to talk about is mental health, mental wealth, through the lens of being a founder, entrepreneur, maker, creative. Anything where you are the boss, even if you're the boss of one, and you're providing some value or product, and people are paying you for it. Yeah, does that sound about that?
Yeah, that sounds great. That's perfect. Yeah, I think in part of the value of having you here is helping start the conversation for folks. I think we're very lucky in there's been less and less stigma about these types of conversations as time has gone on, but for many people they don't even know where to begin. And so in my experience with you and the way you approach these issues, it's a very good way to get people engaged and kind of part of the conversation.
Oh, definitely. And I think like to kick things off too is like, so many the most I'd probably guess most people on here I haven't met yet in person. You may follow me on social, but so I'm originally from the Midwest. Grew up in Indiana. Was raised primarily by my dad, the oldest of oldest of 3 boys. And I was taught climb the corporate ladder, get good grades, get a job with benefits, all those things. But at the same time, my dad had a side hustle. So life of an entrepreneur and full-time thing going on. My professional background, I did corporate America. Last corporate gig was working in commercial real estate on national projects and Midwest projects. And the first step into being an entrepreneur for me was making the decision in 2008 to start a strategy consulting company. From that, I ended up co-founding a logistics company. I was the HR lead, which was really fascinating for this company. But it also meant I got to lead the effort to get us well over kind of $1 million in incentives and things from state and local officials. That crashed and burned. Actually, it was a bad co-founder choice for me, which I'll get into, which you can get into. And then I started a tech company in 2009, 10. Was accepted to an accelerator, had all things clicking except for funding, so ran out of funding. Even had a strategic partnership with Purdue University, which was really badass, but that crashed and burned, and ended up living in a car in New Orleans for like a week. Bounced out of that and started teaching yoga for like 2 years. So swung from greedy corporate ladder to super spiritual. But realized I love business. And so from 2010 to now, my life and businesses have been an iteration around company culture, happy employees, those type of things, strategic, outlooks and those kind of initiatives. And then more recently focused on the thing that underpins everything we do as a business, which is the state of our mental, and then for some folks, if you want, the spiritual, but understanding that the state of our mind creates any kind of physical manifestation that we see in the world.
Cool. Thank you. That's great context, and leads me to kind of the question of, you've had all of this life experience that has led you to this understanding or this engagement. For somebody who's maybe first time founder, hasn't quite hit the wall yet, or had those stressors, like, I think it's better to start with a healthy outlook and coping mechanisms before you hit those stressors. So maybe describe, like, why should people be getting into mental wealth and those kind of things?
Yeah. So I think to level set things, when it comes to like mental health and mental wealth for entrepreneurs, there's a study done in 2015, and this is so taking even without a pandemic, like realizing we were all, I think to level set everyone, we are living through 3 new contexts of what it means to be human. So pre-pandemic, pre-pandemic, pandemic, and then whatever's going to happen after the pandemic subsides. And so pre-pandemic world, as an entrepreneur, there was a study done in 2015 where it was shown, self-reported, entrepreneurs were like 2 times more likely, I want to always make sure I have this, 2 times more likely to suffer depression, 6 times more likely to have ADHD, 3 times more likely to have some type of substance abuse, 10 times more likely to be bipolar, and 2 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts. So just going into it, before you even think of a business idea, knowing this is what you're getting into. And then from a kind of a broad spectrum, that study was actually only done on 242 entrepreneurs, 70% self-reported as male and Caucasian. So then you layer in, as an entrepreneur, I think realizing that we are, by choice or by life circumstance, jumping into something that is exponentially more challenging to our mental health. So, and I think the other thing to level set here is that when you think of too often mental health is defined as the lack of mental illness, and mental illness, it's like it's something that happens to negatively impact your mental health, but you always have mental health. And then mental wealth are the things you do to help positively impact your mental health.
Nice. How much, in your opinion, does the kind of, and it's starting to fade to some extent, but it's still very prevalent, the kind of like the dichotomy between you're going through more stress than you've ever gone through in your life as an individual, and you're likely lonely as a founder, trying to lead a team, and yet the outward perception, the veneer you have to put up is everything's going great, we're killing it, product's great. Like, describe how to kind of balance those things. Like, do you just have to go through it and figure it out, or is there some key to being more honest with yourself in that regard?
Yeah, I think one is I think a lot of what you just said is because of it's happening because of like this media push on what the entrepreneur journey should look like.
Yep.
And I think it's taking the time to practice. Everything I talk about is really like a practice.
Yep.
It's like you to practice and understanding who you really are. Like, what do you really want? And then being able to, when it comes to like having to put up this persona, you can still talk about things are tough. Like this is tough. Like when somebody asks you how you're doing, you don't have to lie about it. If you have to lie, or basically you're lying about it to somebody if you're having a tough day,
Right.
you're not helping yourself nor helping them because they potentially want to be able to help you.
Yep.
And I think understanding that the journey is hard, and if you're leading people, it's even more. If you have a team, or much like you, Rick, you have or like an organization or something where you're the leader. You do have to be a little bit more upbeat to inspire hope within your people. But then one of the tactics or one of the actions you on the flip side need to do is make sure you have a group of founders and entrepreneurs that you can have real talk with. And I think that's so critical, especially when you think of like we always talk about community in the larger aspect, but who are those? Do you have like those 5 people you can turn to that are entrepreneurs, that are not your partner, not your romantic partner, not your sibling? It has to be somebody that's in that seat, because only they can truly empathize the entire like spectrum of what you're going through.
Yep. And this may come across as a loaded question. It's not meant to. Do accelerators exacerbate that problem? Do they help with that kind of? Do they do both? Like, because I know, and I'll put this within some context of Pi. I know within the early days of Pi, we were really guilty of reinforcing a lot of that mythology. That you have to be doing well and you have to be going out to raise money, and if you're not following this kind of like mythological unicorn path, then what are you doing? Why are you wasting time? So you went through an accelerator, so given your experience, like, are we hurting or helping or a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like here's like, so I didn't make it through the whole with that accelerator. We didn't go through the whole process. But what was the great part though was we went down, did our pitch, and did the pitch, and we got accepted. But the first day of like the orientation day where we met with mentors and everyone, the mentors were like, okay, so what's really happening? What's really going on? How are you? How's the business? We heard the pitch, but what's something you can point to that's actually real? So I think many accelerators have fed into this whole thing, and then they also feed into it by sharing things from Fast Company and all these business magazines who their whole goal is to get eyeballs. And so not that they're not spitting some good facts, but it's their goal is to get eyeballs. They're a media company. But what accelerators have the opportunity to do is to create, especially now moving forward, is to create the environment and the space for real conversations to happen. And so to answer your question, I think it's a little bit of both, but now the opportunity and the onus is on any accelerator that wants to come out of this accelerator or co-working spaces that are industry specific to focus on how can they help the person that is the founder.
I really like that perspective. I think my hope is this entire, for all the negative of this experience, that maybe one of the positives is a renaissance rethinking of accelerator, entrepreneurial support, whatever you call it, but that we come up with a new revised model of doing this work, because the old normal is not going to be the way to do the work going forward, I don't think.
Yeah, well, and with I think with the pandemic only helped accelerate like some things, and part of like if you look at the trend of like we as entrepreneurs were showing to be more stressful, more all these things. There was going to be some crash and burn at some point in time, which is scary, but is what it is.
Yeah, well, and I think even folks like you and me who had, I've been through several previous downturns, but at least who had seen like the mortgage crisis and that kind of thing during your professional life, there was always that thing at the back of your mind that this can't go up and to the right forever. we just had no idea when it was actually going to happen or what was going to cause it. But even having that consciousness of a potential downturn, I don't think prepared anyone for the actuality of what is happening right now.
No, I agree. And even me, so you think of like the last, so we're almost 10 plus years. I've been doing my own internal work and now external work with research and everything, to focus on my own like mental wealth. And that's, I've had the romantic relationships, co-founder issues. And so one of the things I did, as we were talking before, like when this pandemic hit, I gave myself the compassion and grace to the first couple of weeks. Like, yes, I know I need to do business. I already had something. Most of my business is speaking or being around people. And like that's like 80+% of it was gone. So I went to Trader Joe's. I got me some chocolate covered almonds, so a bunch of Netflix, and I just let myself be. And I think that's what too often we're so hard on ourselves as entrepreneurs. It's like entrepreneur is part of what you do. It's not your whole life. It's part of what you do, and you have to give yourself space to think and breathe and feel. And especially right now, we're in the pandemic. So context number 2, we're in the pandemic. So our subconscious is working overtime for business issues, for how to feel, how to think, and how to move.
Yeah. I could sit here and talk to you all day and ask questions, but there's a whole audience who showed up who would also like their questions answered. So I'm going to jump in to the questions queue. Again, if you just tuned in or tuned in after we were already talking, if you're not familiar with Crowdcast, rather than using chat to ask questions, there's an ask a question button down at the bottom of the screen, currently next to a highlighted number 7. And if you pop in there, you have the ability to not only ask questions that you would like Anthony to cover, but you also have the ability to upvote questions that others have asked. So even if you don't have a question, maybe spend some time in the ask a question section and upvote ones that you want us to cover. So let's get started. So first one's from Lauren. Lauren, thank you for submitting questions. Tell us more about generational mental wealth and why it is especially important to focus on and champion the mental wealth of underestimated founders.
Okay. Well,
there's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there.
This is where I get to sit back and just listen. Yeah. So good luck with that.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Lauren. Let's break that down a bit. So underestimated founders, underrepresented founders is what they've been called. We've been called in the past. But underestimated founders are Black folks, Black and brown folks, people of color, women, LGBTQ. And those are the folks who have typically been shut out of opportunities, a seat at the table. More recently, you think of PPP, how it was written, or how it's been written, and the data shows that most underestimated folks are getting shut out of the opportunity to get funding. And so when I look at what's happening, I see that the financial piece, which is important because we got to pay for stuff. But I also looked at the mental, just mental health broadly speaking, and that same population of folks are typically under-resourced when it comes to mental health and mental illness, but yet experience the higher percentages of mental illnesses, and from suicide to depression to burnout. And so I'm like, what can I do? And one of the things I looked at is we talk about, financial health and financial wellness and generational wealth and dollars and cents and stocks and real estate. I'm like, well, what about our minds, right? what if we put that same emphasis on making deposits and the compounding effect of those deposits over time, using those to also impact our lives, which in essence impacts our business. So that's why for me, like I started I saw that report, the data I mentioned earlier. I kept seeing it pop up in like Business Insider and Inc. And then like some even non-business magazines were making references to it. So I'm like, okay, my background, my undergrad was in biochemistry. I sold pharmaceutical. I was a pharmaceutical sales rep out of college, so we had to read reports. And I learned right out of college, like whoever writes and pays for the report helps design, in effect, like creates the path to where it goes. Yeah. And so when I read the report and I saw like the demographic data, I'm like, well, what is it for everyone else? And so last year I did a study and called it mental wealth. It just came to me, and then realizing like when I did some searches, I'm like, oh, the term is actually being used by other folks. I'm not using it. Like I'm not the originator of it. I'm just using it in the context of, entrepreneurship. And so when I look at that phrase and I did the report, we know the negative, but I'm like, what's the positive stuff that we're doing? So starting with just like self-care. So the study I did last year was all about the self-care of entrepreneurs in the US and the UK. And here's a tip, entrepreneurs. The reason why I did the US and the UK is that's because I knew people in those places. So, so if you're trying to grow your business, go where you know people. That's a good place to start. And so what I found is that most people had some form of a self-care practice, which a self-care is a mental wealth deposit, if you will. And the top five were close time with friends, reading books, travel, Amazon, Netflix, Disney, whatever, and working out. We can still do 4 of those 5 right now. So, and then this year, the research we're doing is going to be the US, the EU, and the UK, because not only because I know people there, but that's where I'm starting to see more money flow to businesses by underestimated founders. So the generational piece of it is much like, okay, so we're starting this generation. These folks are building mental wealth now. Their sons, they're not their sons, their children, the people that look up to them, they'll see how they're living their life, and those habits get imprinted. So they pass that along. Like one of the things I have is, I have a lot of empathy and compassion because I saw my dad do that like growing up. So that was a piece of wealth that he passed on to me, even though he couldn't pass on $1 unless it was an insurance policy as far as generational wealth. Right. But what it also does, the reason why to focus on entrepreneurs is helping entrepreneurs helps their teams, helps their communities. So yes, they may be creating financial wealth in their communities, but as they start to be better able to build mental wealth, that trickles down to their teams and their communities and everything that happens within their communities.
Okay. You said something that sparked another question for me, which was, and it's okay to say, I don't know, obviously, but in the analysis, in some of the research you've done, is there any like regional context to that as well? Like being in the Midwest, do you feel more pressure and stressors because you don't have access to the capital of a Bay Area or West Coast? Or is it actually more stressful to be in the Bay Area? Like, were there any kind of regional markers for that kind of stuff?
In the research, I didn't track that. But from my own life, it's really interesting. So I've lived in Indiana, I lived in Nashville, I lived in Miami, I lived in the Bay, I lived in LA, and now I live in Portland. And there's some commonalities to the stress. Like outside of the Bay, the stress is the same. It's like most money either flies from, and it's changing now, but from a funding standpoint, it flew from LA or from the Bay to New York and then out of the country. And Miami's kind of an anomaly because they have the gift of being close to Latin and South America. But from a stress standpoint, the stress was still the same. I think the differentiator has been the infrastructure of government. Like even back in 2008, 2009, Indiana, for all its ills, had like tax incentives for investors. So like if you had $100,000 you want to invest in an Indiana company, you got tax credits for it. And something simple like that. But yeah, I think when it comes to some of those like business stressors, it's much the same. But yeah, I'd love to. That's something that making a note of that for this year's study. Thank you.
I mean, I'm curious about that kind of stuff because you always hear both sides of the conversation, right? That some people are like, it's really hard. I have a company that has the potential to be funded in an equity-based financing way, and yet it's hard to raise the money. And then the other argument is, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, it's always hard to raise money. So I'd just be curious to see if there are anything in those findings.
Well, and then like from a mental standpoint too, like putting in the work to be understanding who you are and what you want. The thing that's connected to is like who you choose as co-founders, who you choose as teammates, the culture of your business, the investors you choose, because not all money is created equal. Like the terms could be equal, but the person giving you the money might not be the right person. But if you're in like scarcity mindset and I gotta have the money, you may choose a partner that is not even aligned value with one of your values.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Question from Marquita. Hey, Marquita. What are some daily or weekly tools that we can use to maintain our mental wealth?
Oh, great question. I think one is it's kind of a big bucket, so you can put a bunch of things into it. But boundaries, and I have notes here. I'm looking down, I'm writing notes. So write notes on things I want to say, and then I pick this up from a mentor, then check them off as I'm done. So, but one of the things to do is to create boundaries. And an example of that is Wednesday on my calendar. I have it's no meeting day. And this is pre-COVID, and I've just kept it. But I can have things in there like learning. Like if there's a webinar, I want to like hop into a webinar and learn what's going on. Or like if this call or this convo was on Wednesday, I'd allow it because it's a speaking gig. Like I look at this, like that's the other thing. Language is important. So I look at this as a speaking. I look at this as a speaking gig. But having that day back to boundaries, it's like, this is the boundary. I'm not going to cross it. And if somebody wants to schedule something and they say Wednesday, I'm like, Wednesday doesn't work. How about this day? Another kind of thing you can do, especially right now within the situation we're in now, is create space for work only. And what that does, it keeps you in like the rhythm of your life. And this is kind of, again, a boundary thing. So even if you only have the kitchen table to do stuff on, set your stuff up for work. When you're done with work, leave it. And if you need, put a sheet over it. So at least there's a physical barrier between you and what you need to do. The other things to do, some other kind of actions are right now, from a communication standpoint, email, phone calls, social media are the ways we keep in contact and keep our learning. An actual thing I do on Twitter, which is where you find me most often, is last year, or it's been over a year now, but I started creating private lists. And in the private list, like you can put somebody on a list and they, without following them. So I have a private list of founders and funders and people from PDX, Portland. And And then I unfollow a whole bunch of stuff. I don't care how many people follow me or whatever. I'm not looking for a blue check. That's not that. Everybody has different goals. I mean, I can care less.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I do want to do is make it so that when I come in, I can scroll and get the knowledge I want without being without having any kind of angst. With the exception of like, there's some stuff going on right now in the United States that are, whew. Anyway, but because I'm able to because I made those lists, like I can come in and I can get out without having too many issues mentally. So you're making that deposit. The other thing is, what do you like doing? And right now we live in a world where everybody's at home. Block out whatever time you have for work, but then did you ever want to try painting, or did you ever want to try learn? Like, I want to learn to draw, and I happen to see Square. I use Square for my back end, some of my back end, and they had a partnership with Skillshare. Like, so you get 3 months or 3 months free for Skillshare, so I can learn how to draw. So I have colored pencils that I've had for like 2 years that I've never used. I'm like, hey, let me try this, and that's doing awesome. It without issues. I have a Rubik's Cube that I don't care if I solve, but I know it's something that it gives me time to give my brain to just, move around. On another kind of a higher level is weekly, monthly meetings with a therapist. I've had a therapist in the past. I'll have another one before probably the next 90 days is up. And with the therapist, realizing, warning, it may take more than one therapist, meeting with more than one therapist to find the therapist that works for you. And realizing your therapist, outside of if you have a romantic partner or partners, and then if you have a co-founder, your therapist is like your third most important, relationship you're going to have. And then finding the one that fits for you from a personality style, from a, culturally contextual. Like for me, there's not a lot of like Black therapists in the country. Just by like pure numbers of who's like licensed and everything. So just making time for that. And then another one is like, if you don't feel like if you hit like midday, you don't feel like working, just stop. I mean, we're in a pandemic. Unless you're not a nurse or a doctor, you're not in the hospital. Pretty much everything we're doing is not like life saving, outside of staying inside. Your business will still be there the next day. Giving yourself that compassion and grace, even if you have to put up sticky notes with like positive things, or pick one of the top 5 things that I just talked about. When was the last time you like picked up the phone and texted a friend, or called a friend, or FaceTime your whatever? There's Chacho Valdez from Backstage Capital. Love him. Just a phenomenal human. And he did a tweet about how he does a Sunday call with his nephew. And it used to be they do it every month, but now they do it like I think it's every Sunday. He's like, we used to do it every 2 or 3 months, but he's like, now I'm just going to do it like every week because it feels so good, So you find those things, and there are no rules, like things you can do as long as it's legal. Do something good for your mind. So yeah.
That's awesome.
I hope that helps.
And that was a great answer, and I think where you ended brought me back to kind of where you began. So often I find I set boundaries, and I'm like, things I've classified as work, but may actually give me energy, I don't let across those boundaries. And what I heard you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I heard you say was, I'm assuming you get energy from speaking and sharing your knowledge with people. And so that's why it's okay that on a no meeting kind of day that doing a talk or something is okay. Is that kind of the context of that situation?
That's how I do it. Because I know like it's just me talking about this like reinforces my learning and my understanding. But there's also been Wednesdays when I didn't do anything. I mean, I signed up right now I sign up for a lot of Zooms only because a hot tip, just much like these talks, they're being recorded. So you can sign up for a bunch of Zooms. Some of them will record or some are not. And then you can pick a day you want to learn, just watch all your Zooms. But like yesterday, I think I had one thing in the morning. I talked with my dad, and then the rest of the day I didn't do anything. I watched, I think to open up the day, I think I binged on Upload. There's a new Amazon show. I watched, in the last 36, 48 hours, I've watched all 10 episodes. And I'm not beating myself up about it. 2 years ago, I would have. But it's the practice. Much like, when I say practice, it's much like intuition. Like people say, how do you like grow your intuition, which is a part of like mental wealth and mental health. You do it by little things. Like if you walk out the door and want to go for a walk with your mask on, you walk out and you have this gut feeling to turn left, because it starts to build that muscle. Like it's not just in the moments that you need it. It's like intuition, much like self-awareness, is a thing that's supposed to be always on. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and especially right now, like I find myself taking much different routes when I'm going outside, because inevitably there's somebody coming down the block and I'm like, no, I have to be a block away. Even if I have a mask, I'm going that way.
Yeah. I'm the, they say 6 feet, but I'm like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah,
like
I don't know.
Yeah.
Next question from Alex. Stability is essential for mental well-being, but founders thrive by being certain in unstable circumstances. In terms of sustainable work, what does founder success look like?
Oh, there's a couple parts to that. Good question,
That's
Alex.
another one to unpack.
Yeah. So I'm looking at. Let me think about this.
Yeah.
So I think entrepreneurs and founders, we're taught to live in this level of uncomfort and out of our comfort zone and instability. But because the situation is that much, doesn't mean we need to be unstable. You know, in the context of like founder success, it's like success is what you define it as. And the only way to know what you define it as is to know what you want and then know who you are. And to start doing that is to really start asking your questions like, what do you really like? Not how much money you want to make just yet, but just like asking yourself, like, what do you like doing? What do you like being around? Real world example for me, maybe 3 years ago, I was like, oh, I want to build this $1 million business. I want to do all this stuff and I want to get venture funding and I think I can blah, 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 blah. But then I, had some help. I've had therapists, coaches, mentors, and done my own work too. But understanding that, like, one of the things I love doing is traveling. The other thing I love doing is talking to people. Me in front of a computer screen doing like code or writing a long essay. That's not my style. I could. I mean, give me some time, I can do it. But it's not things that energize me. So understanding, putting myself in situations like being able to travel and be in front of people, for example, are things I need to do in order to get closer to what I want as success. So as an entrepreneur, that means I can make a ton of money or I can have little money. I want to make enough money to pay my bills and help people and do great things in the world. But right now, so I can't travel. So what do? I make sure to stay plugged into like the workshops and things that my friends do over in London. They do for startups and venture capitalists, or if there's something. So I tune in. So I can't physically travel, but that doesn't mean I can't travel in a digital world. And then like success, like understanding that your success, the other work to do is understand like the success of your business does not equate to the success of you as a human. The value of your business does not equate to your own self-worth and self-value. And when you start to like unwrap those and then take them apart and then put them back together, it is understanding that what do you want success to be? Is success for you $1 million exit or a multi-million-dollar exit? Is it to have a business that lasts for 10 years and you have, 50 people that you're able to pay over $100,000 a year? Is it be able to the success? Is success being able to make $1 million in profit or $100,000 in profit? Let's not even say a million, like $100,000 in profit.
Yep.
For the year. But at the same time, you want to take 2 months off for vacation and holiday. And so then how can you make $100,000 in 10 months? And be comfortable with whatever you come up with and continue to do this work, and this mental, increasing your mental wealth allows you to make that statement of what your success looks like, because somebody's going to come out from the outside and go, oh, that's not success. You're like, no, this is my success. This isn't your definition of my success.
Yep. No, I think that's great advice. I really like that. I also think that founders tend to have borderline unhealthy optimism about things, and some of that kind of objectivity or realizing that you can't control all of the factors. Like, I find that's really valuable for founders, because so much of it comes down to timing of a bunch of different elements that are totally beyond your control. And yet that's really hard to get your head around as a first-time founder, third-time founder. I don't care. Like, you feel inspired to do something, so you feel like it must be the right time to do that. And that's a really hard one to get around, for sure.
Yeah. And for me, it's like I was born like with some kind of optimistic gene about just life and humanity and anything. So even in the worst days of my life, I mean, I've gone through my dad's dad. Papa died on my birthday in 1985, my 10th birthday, and then my youngest brother died by suicide in 2003. And then my dad's mom died on my youngest brother's, would have been his birthday a few years later. So when it comes to like business stuff, it's like, I can always be optimistic about business stuff, and but it's tempered, right? So it's understanding optimism and hope, and those things are what drive you to create. But coming back to, part of the, the mental wealth equation is your intuition. And I look back, and one of the lessons I always share is that the logistics company that I said, I had 4 co-founders, don't have that many, who were all pretty much new to the game. And when we were sitting at a pub in Indianapolis, English pub on the back, sunny day. I had about this much left in my second beer, and as we were saying, this is how the company's going to be formed. I had this little voice inside of me that was a whisper. Now it's like it probably was yelling its voice out, but it was saying, "Don't do this. Just stay a consultant on this project." And I didn't listen. And when I look back and have done the work to reflect on those kind of ups and downs of life, that's another tactic I'll say in a second. Is that building that intuition is key, because it can actually help you with your be pragmatically optimistic, right? And understanding, talk about control. You can't control everything. I mean, that's the reality of it. You cannot control what another human being is going to do, and you can't control what the markets are going to do. We can't control what the government's going to do. It doesn't matter who's in office. And you know what? Businesses fail. Most businesses fail, just like most businesses do not get venture capital funding or are not financially successful because of venture capital funding. They're successful because of collaborations and creativity. And like, for example, here in Portland, Arrow Coffee House. Erica Escalante started that company, this is, I think, her second iteration of it, but Arrow, now Cafe Reina. Everybody had to close, and she's like, what am I going to do? And then social distancing, and she did social distancing before we had the mandate. And then she got creative on like a speaker box and all these things. And now she's doing like collaborations with like Stumptown and all that. So So it's that type of energy and creativity and collaboration and human connection and relationships that drive things forward. But to be able to make those decisions in a way that's positive for you and for the community and for your peers and for your customers and clients, you have to know you, because there's people who aren't settled properly, or who have some angst or some issue or something unresolved. They're going to come at you. Like the reality is, like, the more success you have, however you define it, you doing you will be the mirror for people who aren't doing themselves.
Yep. Yeah, I had to take a second with that one. I really like that advice. Yeah, my favorite part about it, if you haven't been following Erica and Arrow, you should be. Like, my favorite one the other day was, like, I don't know if it was on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, but she's like, one of our cooks is really passionate about burgers, so we're making burgers today. And I'm like, when does a coffee shop make burgers?
Exactly.
But, like, it was awesome. So
yeah,
go do it.
And there's no, and right now, how, like, is I think Mark Cuban said, like, talking about this being like the best time to be an entrepreneur in the span of history, and he's kind of right, because there's no rules. Like,
right.
Hamburger joint, they did biscuits and gravy, which is somewhat aligned, but I think the only reason that happened is because there were two people that were laid off from the restaurant industry that were regular customers of hers, that they started talking, and somebody knew how to do great gravy, somebody else had a biscuit shop, and so it's that thing. It's like, don't be linked back to pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic. Whatever you think the way should be, don't think about how it used to be. Think about what could be, and stumble through it.
Yep. That's awesome. This is from Kate Ertman, previous guest. Go back and watch Kate's thing at some point. Kate, thanks for the question. Considering the breadth of your experience as a founder, what are your red flags? Those situations or even specific words that alert you to, this is bad, gotta go, mayday, mayday, in order to keep yourself healthy?
That's a good one. Okay, some of it's, I have to say, some of it's just gut. But the other thing is, like, I think when you hear people talk too much about themselves, and necessarily using words like I, or, sometimes they say if people use more I versus we, depends on the context, right? Sometimes if somebody's asking about them, you're asking about themselves, they're going to say I. But I think the other part of it, the big red flags is when there's a lack of transparency. And I know it's an overall overused word, but authenticity. I think when we're kids, we have zero filter. That's why kids call adults on their BS sometimes, and they're like, "Oh, kids aren't supposed to say that." And you're like, "Oh, they're actually speaking the truth." But I think it's listening to your gut, and then also just, like, listening more than you talk sometimes. So it's not really a red flag, but you can see trends. One of the things I love doing is just studying. Even though I'm a science guy and a mental guy and all that, it's studying humanity. One of the greatest lessons I've ever been given by a mentor was by this guy that was a mentor in commercial real estate. He was talking about study demographics, become a demographer. And it's a practice, and you just start looking at things that people do. And so a great example right now, so we're living in this time of COVID. So to mentally, this is in and of itself a deposit. If you look at the pandemic, and it started in China, politics aside, just look at what happened. There's a pandemic, started in China. It's like a tidal wave out in the ocean. And so it's gone through China, then it went through Europe and all that. And then it got to the United States, where we're the most independently minded people in the world. And so it got here. That's why it's kind of a hot mess. Leadership or no leadership, it's still a hot mess. And everything that's happened in China, it will eventually get here. And so one of the things I was talking with a friend last night, and we were talking about, like, okay, so in China, like, post-pandemic, as they're coming out of it, it's been like the highest divorce rate that they've ever had. So you get that in a place where everything's pretty much locked down by an authoritative government. think of what's happening here, which will eventually happen here. So as an entrepreneur, and I know this kind of like goes a little bit deeper than the question, Kate, but it goes to the point of like paying attention to what's happening to people so you can understand what feels right and what doesn't feel right for you. Being LinkedIn, not the platform, just LinkedIn yourself. But eventually here, there's going to be like increased divorce rate and those kind of things. And some of those people are your peers. Some of them may be you. So that's going to impact things. And so if somebody's coming at you, if somebody's coming at you in the wrong way and speaking to you like abrasively, it may be because of all that's going on in the background. But it comes back to like those things, like, in my life experience, I'm grateful to have people from all walks of life be like great mentors. And I've been open to it, like open to learning from people, and always being the student. It's like, always be the student, always be the teacher. It's like, you can do this. That's kind of the path to walk.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the, again, making a bit of a positive out of a negative. I think the fact that there are folks like China ahead of the curve on this whole thing does give us the ability to kind of research what happens next and more effectively prepare for it, for sure.
Yeah. And as an entrepreneur, you may be able to pivot into an opportunity. I'd say pivot, but it is what it is. The word is the word. Yeah. But you can make a shift in your business to take advantage of that wave. And taking advantage of it isn't negative as long as you're not taking advantage of people.
Right.
Like there's a big difference there. And if you don't understand that, then we need further discussion. But yeah.
Yeah, well, and I've heard from a lot of founders a kind of guilt reflex where it's because they've built a product that is benefiting from the situation, and that's a whole like disjointed mental thing to deal with as well, which is confusing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's giving you space to think through that. Like if you're like Bippy, which is like one of the toilet paper companies out of LA, and so they have toilet paper. They've been sold out. I think they just finally restocked. And something as simple as toilet paper, they're selling left and right, and hand sanitizers. But it's something people need. And if you have another kind of business, it doesn't have to be an essential service business. Like I'm still running my business. I want to make money because I know that what I'm doing is helping people. And I know when I have extra money, I'll be able to help people in a financial way. Time, talent, and treasure, right? That's the what can you do to move humanity forward?
This is probably the last one we'll get to, but I think it's a really good one to kind of wrap things up. From your perspective, what are the best tips for how to handle the heavy pressures of entrepreneurship in general with these added pressures of the pandemic?
I'd start with compassion. Compassion for yourself, and understanding that much like the big trend people are saying that people are working from home, people are not working from home. People are doing work at home during a pandemic.
Big difference.
Big difference. And I think that's the other kind of that practice of listening to what you actually say. And there's always going to be the pressure of running a business, because that's just the nature of what it is. But during a pandemic, you run your business, give yourself the grace to let go. And it's a practice. Again, like give yourself a half an hour one day, be like, I'm just done with it. And then I'll come back to work, or give yourself a full half day and then come back to it. And I think the other piece is the pressure of being a founder in this time is understanding that, back to those three contexts of pre, during, and post, that you're trying to figure out stuff now. As long as you keep moving forward and iterating, and if you get PPP funding, great. If you don't, great. Like I didn't apply because it wasn't like financially worth me, but I'm in the boat as a solopreneur that I applied for unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I keep doing whatever they tell me to do, but I don't. I'm not leaning on the fact that it's coming.
Yeah.
I think it's starting to set your own expectations, and then expectations are tricky because you're doing them in a context that no one has ever experienced. And actually the other side of it is just have fun. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, but have fun with it. Like, oh, that didn't work. You know, it's like putting a post on Twitter. Oh, that landed great. Oh, but it's with your business. As long as you're doing things from a good place, I think you're going to be able to find your way through, and then make sure, because loneliness is another big thing for entrepreneurs. Loneliness, alone and loneliness are two different things. Being alone, like I'm alone in this house right now, but loneliness isn't that heavy and that weight feeling that comes over me, and it's doing those things to check yourself when you're describing a situation, in terms of, am I making this up? Am I blowing this out of proportion? And if you need help, then ping somebody, DM me on Twitter, reach out to somebody you know that is an entrepreneur. I think the last thing is to, we're in a pandemic. I can say everything I want on here. I've never lived through a pandemic, like a global pandemic. SARS and stuff doesn't count. I've never lived through one. Nobody knows exactly how to get out of this. And anybody that says, I know the exact answer, they're lying to you. Yeah. There we go. That's another one. Oh, that's back to red flags. This is the only way. No, not really.
Yeah. Absolutes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolute, sir. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you. I know not to schedule any more time with you.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. This is the point in time where we kind of turn the tables and ask you, Anthony. You know, we always have a bunch of great people who show up and participate in these sessions with us. What can we as a community be doing to help you right now? How can we be most helpful?
Cool. I think it's three things. So one, make time to work on your mental health and mental wealth, because it starts with you. It starts with each of us as an individual, for our lives and then our businesses. Two, if you see anything I post on Twitter, amplify it when it deals with mental wealth. And then the third one is I have one-on-one clients. So I work with founders one-on-one, and we do, one session, 3 months of a session, or whatever. So just reach out. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at the Anthony Ware. Oh, there we go. In the comments. So that's where you can find me. I have zero automation to any of my social. I do automate my email. I do have an autoresponder on my emails because that's the other boundary setter. I have an email inbox. I don't care if it gets to inbox 0. That's not that's not my jam. But Twitter, I do respond to the DMs, or if you hit me with a post or something. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Anthony. This is super informative. Really appreciate you answering those questions for folks. And also, if you want to hear more from Anthony, I know you're working on a podcast too, right? So you got that coming up.
Yeah, so there's going to be a podcast. This is my third podcast. If you go to my website, I have a podcast page, but this new podcast coming out is going to be, the working title right now is Founder Mental Wealth. And actually my first guest is, I'll announce tomorrow, but.
Okay. Yeah, don't spoil it.
Yeah.
People tune in.
I know.
Cool.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for being here. For your calendar going forward, folks, if this was informative, of course it was, and you want to show up for more of them, we've got pretty much a full week next week. So Matt Ellis, the co-founder and former CEO of Cloudability, will be here. Juan Barraza from Portland State, Karthi Chandra from Golden Hour, and Julia Nero from Milk Run. And Milk Run's one of those that, because of the pandemic, has suddenly just exploded in need. So please come back and join us, or even if you can't, think about following Pi on Crowdcast, and we will keep you in the loop when we have stuff coming up. So, all right. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks, Anthony.
All right.
See you
Thanks, everybody.
later.
All right. Bye.